Welcome to Midweek Talks, where we help you follow Jesus and answer your questions in the middle of personal, cultural, social, sometimes political issues. I'm your host today, Mark Ivy, and we're going to talk today about an ongoing, and I don't want to use terminology that is sensational, but it's an ongoing issue, and I think we could even approach the terminology that says a crisis for many young men and women here in North Carolina and around the nation. We have many children who are not with their birth parents for whatever reason that might be, and so they move into something called foster parenting or become adopted by other families. And today our guest is Ashley White. Ashley, we are delighted to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Ashley is the foster and adoptive parent recruiter and trainer for or with Catawba County Social Services.
Yes.
And a group called Family Builders.
Yes.
So we're going to talk today about foster kids, foster parenting, that kind of process. But where I'd like to begin today, Ashley, is with the why. Mm-hmm. Why are we even talking about this today? Because in the minds of a lot of people, at least in my head, yeah, you know, there's kids out there that need to be in different homes, but it's not that big a deal. There's plenty of people to do that. Let's talk for a minute about that, because in North Carolina alone, right now, there's somewhere around 12,000 or so kids that need a place to go. So let's take the child who doesn't have a parent in the home that can take care of them. First of all, why does that even happen? A 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old is removed from the home. Why do those things happen?
So usually that is because of neglect or some sort of abuse, or sometimes just kind of abandonment. It would just depend on the situation. There's numerous reasons why children come into care.
So when we're talking neglect, are we talking just ignoring the child, not taking care of the child? When we're talking abuse, are we talking physical abuse, sexual abuse, all of the above? Mm-hmm.
So neglect, that could be kind of abandonment, could also be, you know, drug use. That's why the children come into care. And then with abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional maltreatment, all of those things.
So how, for instance, let's take, well, let me ask you first of all, what age would a child go into foster parent?
So a child can enter care from ages 0, so a newborn, you know, 1 day old, until they're 17, and maybe 1 day until their 18th birthday. They're still considered a minor at that point and would need foster care if we found abuse or neglect.
So in North Carolina, what's the average age of somebody that's moved into foster care?
Right now it's around 0 to 5, kind of that age range.
Okay, so that's a surprising number to me. To have kids that are 3, 4, 5 years old be the majority of those that are moving into foster care. And so what you're saying is that somewhere, like I mentioned, in North Carolina is like 12,000 kids. Most of those are from 0 to 5, is what you're saying. So how would we even know that there's a child that is in need of help?
Absolutely. So there are so many mandated reporters, especially in the state of North Carolina. That could be a teacher, a doctor, a police officer, even a neighbor that sees this abuse or neglect going on. And, you know, they call and make a report, and that's how we get involved. And, of course, we go out and investigate it and kind of decide from there whether a child goes into foster care or not.
Yeah, so I don't know how many know who are watching. Clergy, they are mandated reporters. Mm-hmm. And it's like within a 24-hour period, if we see something, not just rumored necessarily, whatever, but if we have factual information about something, we are required to report at the penalty. There's a penalty, if we don't do that. So I'm curious, what have you seen in kids? Okay, what types of things have you seen in children that require them to be removed from a home?
So I think kind of in that sense, if there was abuse, if there was neglect, and we take custody, of course, coming into foster care is a trauma, so that child will have some behaviors, but there is a need behind every behavior of our children in foster care. So just kind of take a look at that from a different perspective, that, they are in foster care and they do have these behaviors, but for us to work with them, and as foster and adoptive parents to work with them and get them the services that they need.
So I'm curious though, a parent or a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or a separated parent could make an accusation that's not necessarily true. How do we define neglect? So you didn't feed him breakfast, you're neglecting him, right? How do we define those things? Because sometimes those can be subjective terms. So what's the process with that to define if a child is even really needing help, or if it's an angry neighbor, angry spouse, boyfriend? How do we know that?
Absolutely. So when the person calls in to make a report, it goes through a screening process. We have an intake team, and this is, throughout the state of North Carolina with different human services departments. So it'll go through kind of that process. If they feel that the risk is there, they'll be assigned an investigator. The investigator will go out to that home, meet the child, meet the parents, and make sure that that child is safe to do an assessment.
So let me go through the process for a minute. I am person A, and I pick up the phone and I dial, is it an 800 number, I'm assuming, and I say, look, I think there's something going on here. Is the response time based upon what the urgency of the situation seems like it might be? So it could be a visit in a week, it could be a visit within a few hours.
It would just depend on that call and, the assessment that we take from that phone call, and all the information that we gather, the department's able to look and see what the urgency is to when a social worker would need to go out there and make that assessment.
So what types of, and we're using the term trauma here, and you had mentioned earlier, we were talking before we started, that to remove a child from a home is trauma itself, and it certainly is. Sometimes, even with when there's spousal abuse going on, the familiar that is bad is better than the unfamiliar that is good. Because at least in what's not good, I'm familiar with it. If you take me out of that situation, I don't know what I'm going to have to face. So what types of trauma are we talking about here that would require a child to be removed from a home?
So kind of like I said, if abuse, neglect, if the investigator...
And we're talking physical abuse.
Physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect such as drug abuse, or even kind of maltreatment.
Drug abuse by the parent.
By the parents, yeah. When they go in and just kind of assess safety and risk and decide at that point, is there a immediate safety concern? And at that point, the child would enter foster care. It would just depend on the investigator's assessment.
And so that child could potentially be removed rather rapidly.
It would just depend. We do have to get clearance from a judge.
Okay. So does that require an order from a social worker at midnight sometimes, or is that does it go through the court system? How does that work?
So it would just depend on the investigator. Sometimes they can take custody without, just depending on what time it is, but the judge does have to sign off, and we do go to court, once all this happens, and we have regular court kind of hearings for the judge to kind of gather what's happening with the child and to make sure that, that child is kind of in a permanent place, because North Carolina has a year to permanency rule where North Carolina wants a permanent place kind of stated for that child in foster care, so they're not in foster care for 2, 3, 4 years.
So when you say a permanent place, they're going to be in foster care. They could be in foster care up to a year, but that's supposed to be the maximum.
Mm-hmm.
So they're either going to go back to the parent, or they're going to be adopted. Is that right?
Adopted.
Into another family?
Yes, adopted, or they could be in a kinship placement, which would be a relative or a family friend.
And what's the difference between like foster caring and guardianship?
So being a foster parent, you go through all the classes and you're licensed to be a foster parent by the state of North Carolina, kind of a guardianship or kinship placement. They can also be licensed. Here at Catawba, we have an amazing kinship program, and we want to train our kinship parents, but sometimes they are not trained and not licensed. But our goal at Catawba County is to get our kinship, our guardianship families through that training and get them licensed as foster families.
I want to ask you about that in a minute, because I'd like to know some more details about that. Like if I want to become a foster parent, what do I really have to do?
Absolutely.
Okay. But I'm thinking about the emotional side of this, because it would be very emotional for a child to be removed from a home. And I would think, being a parent myself with 3 children, who are now older, obviously, but how emotional it would be for the parent to have a child removed from the home. Is there anything in place that says, okay, we're going to help the parent through this, and not just remove the child and the child is out of that environment, but is there also anything for the child as it relates to counseling or whatever? So let's do a real life situation here.
Okay.
I'm the parent, let's say, and my child is removed from my care for whatever reason. What's anybody going to do for me? Okay, what options do I have from social services? Because sometimes that is looked upon as a very hostile type of action. But standing back saying, okay, behind the scenes, what nobody else is seeing, behind the scenes, what can be done for me as a parent?
Absolutely. So we want reunification to happen. We want the child to be reunified with their birth family. 99% of the time, that is the plan from the get-go when a child enters foster care. So the biological or birth parent, whoever the child was removed from, they're given a case plan, and we're there to support them. We have meetings once every couple months to talk about the progress. It is a requirement as a foster parent to engage in shared parenting. And when I say shared parenting, I mean we are communicating. The foster parents are communicating with the birth parents. The birth parents still, they are the child's parents, and we will never take that, away. We want to support them and help them work on their case plan and engage in shared parenting so that, they still are involved in their child's lives.
So am I required like once a week to go to counseling, or what's the requirement of me as a parent? Because if I want, you said every couple of months, that sounds like a long time before, before I could get my child back. 2 months is a long time. 6 months is longer. Okay. So what's going on? Am I required to go to weekly counseling, weekly classes? What am I required to do as a parent?
So it would just depend on the reason that the child entered foster care. The case plan, like what a parent, needs to do, is kind of tailored to that, and the judge kind of sets that forward on what has to be completed by the parent. So it would just depend.
So there's a case plan.
Yes.
And it's different for every situation.
Yes.
And the parent, I suppose, if they want their child back, would follow that plan.
Yes.
and do their best to fulfill whatever the requirements are. What happens if we're talking about an addict, for instance, a parent, that parent has got to do something more than just, have a discussion with a counselor. So what's done in a case of like substance abuse and that kind of thing?
So once again, it would just depend on the judge, but the judge could order inpatient counseling or attending AA or NA meetings weekly, getting a sponsor. It would just depend on what the judge would set forward.
And so then on the other side with the child, it's a 6-year-old kid, let's say. What's going to be going on with the child? I know they're going to still communicate with their parent. That's good to know because I'm thinking, okay, child separated from parent, no contact. That's not accurate, right?
No, that is not accurate. We want shared parenting to happen. There'll be visits once a week. We want communication just because we know that's what benefits the child. It's not beneficial for the child to go into a foster home and not speak to their birth parents. And we know with the birth parents, it's beneficial for them to speak with their child, and we know how important that is, especially when they're working towards reunification or going back home.
So what's going on? I'm a 6-year-old kid. What's going on with me other than the fact I've been removed? That's traumatic. Maybe there has been some type of physical or sexual abuse. That adds to the trauma. Then I'm living in a foreign home where the rules are all different. What's going on for me as the 6-year-old child?
Absolutely. So every child in foster care has a right to all medical services and counseling services. We'd find what would work for that 6-year-old boy, whether that be he's going to play therapy once a week or some kind of
Now,
counseling.
what's play therapy?
So that is just when they kind of talk and, they're playing with different toys and, it is like a counseling session, but for a 6-year-old really can't sit in a chair and just talk.
Yeah.
So just different kind of therapies, what works for that child. We are here to, help the child. The child's assigned a foster care worker and who's that support. So, we're finding out what works best and, training the foster parents for trauma-informed training.
So there's a foster parent, but there's also a foster care worker assigned to that child. The thought comes to me that this is like really labor intensive. Are there enough people within the system to be able to handle the number of kids that are actually needing care?
At Catawba, we are well staffed and we are able, to give our undivided attention to our children, on the caseload. But, in general in North Carolina, social work is, one of the top jobs that does have burnout. So absolutely, always a need for social workers.
So I want to ask you in a minute, if I want to become a foster parent, give me the details of what I have to do, okay? But let me ask you emotionally for you, being in this occupation, because I would think, in this law enforcement or EMS, you see things that are very traumatic even for you. So, and you mentioned burnout. Is that just because of the constant emotional demand that it requires from you as an individual, even though you're you're in the organizational piece of the social service side of it? But is that because that you see a lot of things that are just draining?
Absolutely. Back when I, first started at Department of Social Services, being a social worker, I was in foster care. And, being a foster care worker, you see so much and the things these children go through. And it is it's hard. It would be hard on anyone, even outsiders looking in, but absolutely, definitely very emotional job.
And it requires you, I guess, sometimes, I'm just thinking in my head here, going into a home sometimes could be dangerous. Do you have to bring law enforcement with you sometimes, or is that something you just, hey, knock on the door, hey, I'm from social services, like, can I talk to you? How's that work?
So it would just depend. I was never an investigator, so I've never been in that situation. However, I think it would just depend on the situation, but usually it is just the social worker going out there.
It is. That seems a little like we need some bravery here. Okay, because you really don't know what you're going to encounter.
Yeah.
So I am thinking about, let's say, becoming a foster parent. Okay. Walk us through the process, not just generally. Okay. Take me through some details of what I'm going to have to do, because I'm like, okay, I want to be a foster parent. I go up to social services, hey, I want a child right today. Give me a child. I'm a good parent. I'm a good person. I want somebody in my house. I want to help. That's not how it works. Yeah. Although it used to work more like that, right?
Yes. Back, 1970s, you could just go up if you had a bed and you had a home, could get licensed, but not anymore.
Like overnight?
Yes.
Literally?
Yeah.
That's okay. Like, so back in the 70s, hey, I'd like to be a foster parent. So there was no like background check and all that kind of stuff? And
it was way different back then.
Okay.
My co-trainer, I teach the foster parent classes, and she used to be a foster parent back in the day, and during our training, she would always talk about, when she was a foster parent, she had an extra bed in a home, and that was, all they really looked for.
Okay, so I want to become a foster parent. What do I need to do?
Okay, so I will make this Catawba County Family Builder specific, but I will go, all the requirements are almost the same. So if you come to me and say, hey, God has called me to be a foster parent or adoptive parent, I would sign you up for our information meeting. We do that on the second Tuesday of every month at 6:00 p.m. via Zoom. We found great success doing it via Zoom. We had to adapt to COVID, but it worked. And from there, I go over kind of all the information to be a foster parent. At that point, you decide if you want to continue. And if you do want to continue, you kind of fill out paperwork with me.
Okay, pause right there. What information?
I'm going to get to that.
All right, okay.
Okay, so once you do want to continue, we set up an interview, and I kind of get to know you a little bit better, and we staff it in our kind of committee. So from there, if you're kind of approved to be a foster parent, the requirements to being a foster parent, you have to attend our TIPS MAP training, which is trauma-informed partnership class. So from there, I am one of the trainers who teaches this class. It is 6 weeks long, and we go over kind of all scenarios. We call it, it's called TIPS MAP because we say it's a roadmap. You go through that training. You also have to be CPR and first aid certified, which we offer in-house. Your home has to be pretty good condition. We have to see that you have space for a child. We also need to see that you are financially able to take on a child. That's not saying that you have to be, rich, but just that you're able to support yourself and an added child. You also have to get approved by your physician that you're healthy enough to be an adoptive or a foster parent. You also have to do fingerprints, and the fire marshal will come and do a home inspection just to make sure that you have a working smoke detector and a fire extinguisher. And you're also assigned a licensing worker. This licensing worker kind of does an assessment of you and your family, really talks to you, gets to know you, and they write a license. It's about a 20-page paper of kind of your life, and they send it to the state of North Carolina. And once the state of North Carolina approves it, you are approved to be a licensed or adoptive foster parent. And I know this sounds like a lot, but we have a great team of licensing workers who kind of walks you through step by step.
So from the moment I attend the online meeting, which is about how long, an hour and a half?
About an hour and a half, yes.
Okay, about an hour and a half, and I'm going to get the information of what I have to do. Is that basically what that meeting's for?
Yes, all
Okay.
that information.
Okay, then I find out, okay, at that meeting, I say, no, this isn't for me. Or I say, you know what, I'm interested. From the time I do that meeting to the time I'm approved to become a foster parent, how long does that take?
It's about a 6-month process, just
Okay.
because of the paperwork, the classes, and all the assessments and the visits the social worker has to do, about 6 months.
Okay, so you talk about the specific requirements. Is that an evaluation? Is there like a psychological evaluation of me, or something that says, oh, this person is crazy, or this person can, or like, no, this person's not going to do that. We can't do that. That whole 6-week process is the evaluation as well, or does that evaluation happen when the person actually comes to my house?
So it kind of happens when you come to the social worker comes to your house. However, during those trainings, we call it a mutual decision making process, because absolutely you may get into those classes and say, hey, fostering or adopting is not for me, and that's perfectly okay. We want you to decide that in those classes, but the social worker comes out. There's no clinical psychological evaluation. She's just there talking to you, getting information, and getting to know you a little bit better.
I'm assuming there's some kind of background check on me.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Background check.
Yeah. Okay. And then in terms of income, if somebody's saying, I don't know if I can afford to do this, is there any, or are there any financial support systems in the system to help foster parents raise a child, or are they totally financially responsible for that child?
So you will, if you are a foster or adoptive parent, you do receive a kind of stipend for that child every month, but
Okay.
We do want to make sure that the foster parent is financially stable, just because if that money wasn't there, would they be able to support that child? We look
Okay.
at that too.
And there are certain requirements in the type of house. It doesn't have to be a mansion or anything, but a decent house, clean. Is the medical condition of the child taken into consideration in terms of the foster parent's ability to take care of special needs kids? So let me ask you about special needs kids, okay? Because that's kind of a different. It's not different. It's still foster care, but that's sort of another side of this, is it not?
Yes, so absolutely. There are special needs children who unfortunately do enter foster care, and they may require a higher level of care, which we call therapeutic. Catawba County, we do not license therapeutic families, but private agencies who do license therapeutic, they'll have therapeutic foster parents who have that training to take care of a higher kind of special needs child.
So, do I still have to go through the same process with a special needs child, and then I'm sent to another organization? Is that right? If it's a special needs child?
So, if it was a special needs, if they came through with Catawba, we would try to outsource and find a therapeutic foster home through a private agency. So that's kind of how all the Department of Social Services work around North Carolina. If we don't have, we outsource to private agencies who also license foster and therapeutic foster parents.
And they have their own
Yes.
requirements of training and that kind of thing. Okay. All right. Brother and sister. Do they get put in the same home? Do they get separated? How does that work?
It is so important to us, and even anyone who is a social worker, how important it is for siblings to be together. I know for myself, if I was separated from my sister, that's another trauma. If I, were in foster care, but absolutely, it is our main goal. If there are siblings, we want to place them together. That is what we strive for. Sometimes with, extreme circumstances, it doesn't happen, but sibling visits have to happen if they are not placed together. They will see each other.
And I guess placing them together is at the discretion of the foster parent that says, I want a brother and sister, versus they say, this is kind of maybe an odd question, but if I say, I don't want a boy, I want a girl, I don't want a girl, I want a boy. Is that how that works too?
Yeah, we take into consideration that because we know that you all know your family the best. So we ask you kind of, what do you envision? What do you see yourself being a foster parent for? But absolutely, we don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. We want to know exactly the preferences that you have.
What about school? How does that work with a foster child?
So we want to strive to keep the child in the same school. We try to make arrangements, but unfortunately sometimes it doesn't happen, but that is our goal, to keep the child in kind of their home school.
So here's a difficult question. Is there ever an approved foster parent that has to be, for lack of a better term, disapproved? That's approved, and then we say, you know what? They're not really qualified to do this. It looked good on paper, because sometimes things can look good on paper. How does that ever happen, or does that, like, the screening is so good, like we don't hardly ever have that happen?
Yeah, so our screening process is thorough. We really talk to people. We really get to know people. So we, it's our job to avoid that. But sometimes foster parents do get in there and realize, hey, this is really overwhelming, and this was not the right choice for me and my family. And we understand that and get it. But every move for a child is trauma. Even if they're moving from a foster home to a foster home, that's another traumatic event that has happened.
So let me ask you about that. So the goal in North Carolina is only in foster care for 1 year. Is that right?
Yeah.
So does that potentially mean that a child could be in 2 or 3 different foster care parenting homes?
It would just depend on the foster parents, but we want to, keep that child in the same home until that permanent plan's identified, whether they go to an adoptive home or with their birth family. But absolutely, it could happen. But, that's why we have all this trauma-informed training, just because we want our foster parents to be trained and know that there's, like I said before, that there is always a need behind that behavior, so we can address it and not have that many moves for a child.
So I'm thinking, and this is part of my, or maybe somebody's misunderstanding. We have heard in the past of children being in foster care for many years.
Mm-hmm.
Is it generally standard procedure now in most states that doesn't happen?
Yeah, that is the goal, for that not to happen.
Okay. So at the end of that year, or is it possible that a child in foster care could be reunited back with the parents before the in 3 or 4 months, 6 months?
Absolutely,
whatever?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. If that doesn't happen at the end of that year, then what?
So, the social workers and the judge and go in and decide on, what's the next step for this child? Is it an adoption? Are we going to search for a relative? Will they be with that relative? Will it be guardianship? There's just so many, things that could happen. But we don't want a child to sit around, in foster care.
So I'm thinking, though, with so many kids in North Carolina needing somebody, it would imply to me that there are more kids than there are places. Is that right?
Absolutely. There's a huge need for foster and adoptive parents. I mean, not only in Catawba, but the state of North Carolina.
So at the end of that year period, the goal is actually either reunification or adoption, but there's other options besides adoption and besides foster care. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Which is like another family member. Is that right?
Yeah, it would just depend on the plan of that child. The judge definitely will talk.
Potentially, though, based upon the circumstance or the situation, that child might not ever go back home, right? That's possible,
Yeah.
right? Do you find that if by the end of a year, if that home, the original home, still really isn't qualified for that child to go back, then it's probably not going to happen?
It would just depend on the process. The court kind of makes that.
Yeah, because I'm thinking to myself, look, Dad, or look, Mom, if you can't get it together in a year, then maybe your life is more important than the life of your child. I mean, that's just I'm just being real hard here. But it would seem to me that if a parent really wanted their child, they would do everything they possibly could to get the child back. I mean, that would be my assumption. Maybe my assumption is it's not right. I'm kind of like, y'all, you've had a year. I suppose, and you say it's up to the judge, but I guess a judge, here I am sitting in the judge's place, right? Saying, look, dude, you haven't done a thing that you've been told to do this last year. You're slack on everything. I suppose the judge could give grace and say, I'm going to give you another 6 months or something like that,
Yeah,
or whatever.
absolutely.
But I'm thinking, if you aren't making an effort by that amount of time to prove some good faith effort here, then maybe that child doesn't need to come back into your home. I mean, that may sound harsh, and I know that's the goal. The goal is obviously reunification. But I'm thinking you've had enough time to turn some things around here. Do you have a percentage of children that are removed from the home that actually end up going back to the home? What percentage of kids are moved to foster care and then are moved back to their home?
I do not have a number off the top of my
Okay.
head. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm just wondering, do most kids end up going back home, or do most kids not end up going back home?
I don't want to give you a
Yeah,
wrong
okay.
ballpark.
Is there a sense in your observation of things, or would you rather not do that?
No, I'd rather not.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll be accurate
Yeah.
here, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in terms of the actual process, and there may be some numbers too that you want to share with us.
Yeah.
So go ahead and share some of those numbers, because I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as of May 28th, there are 282 children in foster care in just Catawba County.
In just Catawba County. Now,
Just-
just want to remind people, that's just Catawba County. There's about 12,000 kids in the state. Just Catawba County is almost 300 kids.
Yes.
In foster care. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you, pause there. So what do I do if I want to help a family that's fostering a kid? Are there programs out there available that help foster families that maybe provide resources or things like that?
Absolutely. We have a great partnership with Fostering Hope Catawba Valley. The kind of starter of that is Leanne Setliff, and she is amazing, and
Yeah.
she's one of our foster parents, and she has kind of rallied together the support group for foster and adoptive parents, and she provides resources to the Catawba Valley area, whether that be diapers, beds. She even provides for the birth parents if they're getting their child back and need a car seat or a bed. Fostering Hope Catawba is amazing. So absolutely, if you're looking to get involved and you don't think fostering or adopting is right for you, contact Fostering Hope Catawba Valley. They're on Facebook.
Okay, cool. All right, go. What else?
Okay, so 282 children in care. So right now, 148 of those children live out of county, and 96 of those could move back if we had enough foster homes in Catawba. So that is our goal.
Okay, so say that again. They're living outside of the county.
Outside of Catawba
They're
County.
Catawba County kids, but they might be being fostered by somebody in Iredell County or Burke County
Yes.
or something like that. Okay, because there's not enough here. Okay, did you get that? All of you who are listening right now? They need more foster parents here in the county of Catawba. Okay.
Yes, so 96 of those children could move back if we had enough foster homes. And so May 16th was Foster Care Sunday, and we do this big outreach. Just, if one member of a church became a foster parent, of all the churches in Catawba County, our problem would be solved.
I don't know if I think I was told sometime back there's over 600 churches in Catawba County. That would solve the issue.
It would
Just one family from
Yep.
each church.
Just
Okay.
one family from each church, that would solve our problem. Right now, we have 96 licensed foster and adoptive and kinship families in Catawba, which is amazing, but it's not enough.
Sure.
So, just to kind of some happy news, we had 76 adoptions finalized between July 2019 and June 2020.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Now, those adoptions could be from 0 to 17, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and an adoption, and even a 17-year-old is still considered a minor, correct?
Yeah.
In this context, okay. All right.
Absolutely. And kind of the age ranges of our children that are in foster care. So 20% are between that 0 to 2, 15% are between the ages 3 to 5. 6 to 10 is 21%, 11 to 14 is 18%, and 15 to 17 is 15%. And we actually have 11% of those 282, they're 18 and over, because we do offer a voluntary placement agreement that they can sign, and they have support even when they're adults.
Okay. Do they potentially stay in those homes, or they're kind of out on their own, but they're not, I guess. Right?
No, so they could stay in their foster home, or in this program, we want to give they're young adults. We want to give them that sense that you are an adult, and we're just here to support you. So they could be in an apartment, they could be living with a friend, all of those things.
Mm-hmm. For those of you that are watching here, the goal of this is just to help us understand that we have a real need in America, actually, because we're in crisis mode in America, folks, as it relates to kids in a number of different ways. But here in Catawba County, there's also a significant need for foster parenting and adoptive parents. And even, how much do you see young girls that maybe become pregnant who are not married that give up their children? Mm-hmm. And then they also need, the child needs a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. On the North Carolina kind of fostering website, they have those statistics with children who, leave foster care that become pregnant, and all of those things. I cannot remember them off the top of my head, but absolutely.
Yeah, but those are very real needs. So those of you who are watching, we're going to put the Family Builders contact information up so that you are able to think about it. And we talked earlier, Ashley, parenting is just like the most important responsibility that we have. Mm-hmm. And there may be those of you, and I believe it's a call. It's not just like, hey, even parenting is a calling, which I believe is a calling from God. Mm-hmm. And maybe you're watching this and you're saying, you know what? I might want to do that. Look, there's no obligation. As Ashley said, it doesn't hurt to inquire and just say, am I too old for this? Am I too young for this? Is it something that we're interested in? You said you do it on Zoom.
Yes.
How do they find the Zoom?
So all they would have to do is send me an email. We're on Facebook. We are on fostercatawba.com is our website. So.
Fostercatawba.com. Mm-hmm. Okay, and your email? My
email is awhite.
White.
Like the color, yeah. Yep. At catawbacountync.gov.
At catawbacountync.gov. White at catawbacountync.gov. Well, Ashley, thank you for sharing with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
What you're doing is significant for the kids of this region. And I get why it's emotionally draining, why it would be for many people involved in what you're doing. But thank you so much.
Absolutely.
For doing what you're doing. And thank you for watching Midweek Talks today. Make sure that you share this and let people know what's happening. And periodically we just let you know what's going on in Catawba County. And the Bible actually says that God sets the lonely in families. And oftentimes he does that through foster parents and adoptive parents. God touches your heart with this, go ahead and contact Ashley and those at Family Builders, because there may be a child that God has specifically for you. Thanks for watching today, and we will see you next time on Midweek Talks.